There are moments in life when you're surrounded by people. Bright smiles shine around you, promises of happiness echo through the corridors of your days. And yet, deep down in your chest, there exists an anguish you cannot name or confess to anyone. It's as if you're playing a role you didn't choose, following a script you never fully read, while a voice constantly whispers that something fundamental is missing. You look at other people, and they seem so certain of their choices, so confident in their directions, and you wonder if they too carry this same sense of emptiness disguised behind their smiles. Today we're going to dive into this profoundly human experience that Albert Camus would call the encounter with the absurdity of existence, this silent anguish that we all feel but few dare to admit. Camus observed that we live in a world full of promises that can never be completely fulfilled. From childhood, we're fed narratives that happiness is always on the next step, in the next achievement, in the next relationship, in the next job, in the next change. And so we build our entire lives waiting for a moment of completeness that stubbornly remains always one step ahead of us. This constant promise that life makes sense, that there exists a greater purpose waiting to be discovered, that our existence has a fundamental reason for being, ends up becoming a source of anguish when we face the naked reality that perhaps, just perhaps, there is no definitive answer waiting for us. It's like waking up from a beautiful dream and realizing you were dreaming, but at the same time being unable to fall back asleep or fully accept being awake. Have you ever noticed how people talk about their lives in public? There's a specific social language for this. Everyone has plans, everyone knows exactly where they want to go, everyone seems to have cracked the secret code of existence. But when you observe more closely, when you manage to get past this superficial layer of manufactured certainties, you realize that each person carries their own version of this inexplicable anguish. It manifests in the middle of the night, when silence amplifies the questionings that during the day we manage to suffocate with activities, commitments, and distractions. It appears in those moments when you're doing exactly what you should be doing, following all the steps you learned that lead to fulfillment, and yet you feel like you're representing someone else's life. Camus understood that this feeling is not a personal failure. It's not a sign that you're doing something wrong, or that you need to try harder to find your purpose. In fact, he saw this anguish as an awakening to a fundamental truth about the human condition. We are beings who naturally seek meaning, significance, definitive answers to the great questions of existence. But we live in a universe that remains fundamentally silent about these questions. There is no cosmic voice that will tell us what our purpose is. There is no instruction manual hidden somewhere waiting to be discovered. There is no greater force that will deliver the answers to us on a silver platter. This tension between our human need to understand and the silence of the world around us is what Camus called the absurd. And here lies an interesting discovery. Most people, when faced with this reality, try to escape from it in every possible way. Some dive into work obsessively, as if productivity were an antidote against existential anguish. Others throw themselves into intense relationships, hoping that another person can fill the emptiness they feel inside themselves. Some seek answers in belief systems that promise definitive explanations for everything, while others surrender to addictions or constant distractions to avoid having to face the inner silence. But Camus proposed something radically different. Instead of fleeing from this anguish, instead of trying to cover it up with temporary solutions, he suggested that we recognize it, that we embrace it, that we accept it as a fundamental part of who we are. When you stop fighting against this feeling that something is always missing, when you stop blaming yourself for not having found the definitive meaning of your existence yet, something interesting happens. You realize that this anguish is not the problem to be solved, but rather the starting point for a more authentic way of living. It's as if you finally stopped trying to solve an impossible puzzle and started creating your own image with the pieces you have available. Real freedom doesn't come from finding the right answers, but from accepting that perhaps there are no right answers waiting to be discovered. This perception completely changes how you relate to the promises that life offers. You stop waiting for the next event, the next achievement, the next phase of life, to finally bring the sense of completeness you've been seeking. Instead, you begin to create moments of meaning here and now, with what you have available, without waiting for ideal conditions or the arrival of something external that will solve everything. It's a subtle change, but profoundly transformative. You continue making plans, continue having goals, continue relating to other people. But now you do all this from a different foundation. No longer expecting these actions to solve your existential anguish, but creating meaning through them precisely because you chose to do so, not because you have to. The smiles around you begin to make more sense when you understand that each person is navigating their own version of this fundamental human experience. That person who seems to have everything figured out also carries their silent anguish. That friend who always has definitive advice about how to live also sometimes wakes up in the middle of the night, wondering if they're on the right path. This understanding doesn't diminish the value of human relationships. On the contrary, it makes them more genuine. When you stop expecting other people to have the answers you don't have, when you stop pretending you have everything under control, you can connect with them in a more real, more vulnerable, more human way. Pause for a moment now and think about your own experience with this anguish we're exploring. When was the last time you felt this sensation of playing a role you didn't choose? Leave your answer in the comments. It can be something simple like, "I feel this sometimes too," or it can be a more detailed account of your experience. Remember that you're not alone in this, and your honest response can help other people watching this video feel less isolated in their own existential anguish. Camus spoke about revolt as a response to the absurdity of existence, but it's not about an angry or destructive revolt. It's more like a silent affirmation that you choose to continue living, creating, relating, even knowing that there is no cosmic justification for doing so. It's saying yes to life, not because it has a predetermined meaning, but precisely because you decide to give meaning to it through your choices, your actions, the way you decide to relate to others and to the world around you. This revolt is simultaneously an act of humility and courage. Humility because it recognizes that you don't have the definitive answers. Courage because you choose to continue living intensely anyway. There's a strange beauty in this acceptance. When you stop constantly searching for external signs that you're on the right path, when you stop waiting for someone or something to confirm that your life has value, you discover that you can create your own sense of direction. Not based on absolute certainties, but based on your conscious choices of how you want to live each day. It's like learning to dance even without knowing all the steps of the choreography. You move with what you know, improvise when necessary, and discover that the dance continues to be beautiful even without a rigid script. The promises that society offers continue to exist around you, but you relate to them differently. You can pursue professional goals not because you believe they will solve your existential anguish, but because you chose that this is an interesting path to explore your capabilities. You can build deep relationships not expecting another person to complete you, but because you decided that sharing the human experience with someone is a valuable way to spend the time you have available. You can create art, study, travel, care for other people, not because there's a cosmic obligation to do so, but simply because these actions resonate with who you chose to be. The anguish that nobody confesses transforms, thus, from a burden to be carried in secret to a constant companion that reminds you of your humanity. It stops being something that needs to be cured or solved and becomes a reminder that you're alive, that you're conscious, that you have the capacity to question and to choose. It's like having an internal friend who nudges you from time to time to remind you not to take things too seriously, not to identify too much with the roles you play, to remember that in the end, you're improvising just like everyone else. When you meet other people who also recognize this fundamental human condition, when you can have honest conversations about this shared experience of not knowing exactly what you're doing here, something magical happens. You discover that the existential loneliness you thought was uniquely yours is actually a bridge that connects you deeply with all other human beings. Each person you encounter is dealing with their own version of this anguish, is creating their own meanings, is trying to make sense of an existence that didn't come with an instruction manual. This doesn't make life less serious or less important. On the contrary, it makes each choice more meaningful because you know you're choosing freely, not following a predetermined script. Each moment of genuine connection with another person becomes more precious because you understand that both are consciously choosing to be there, sharing this strange and beautiful experience of being alive. Each project you decide to embrace gains more weight because you know you're investing your limited time in that, not because you have to, but because you want to. The transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process of getting used to the idea that you can create meaning without having all the answers, that you can live intensely without needing external justification to do so. It's like learning a new language. At first you feel uncomfortable and insecure, but gradually you gain fluency in this new way of relating to existence. Moments of anguish continue to appear, but you develop a new relationship with them. Instead of interpreting them as signs that something is wrong with you or your life, you recognize them as reminders of your consciousness, of your capacity to question, of your refusal to accept easy answers to complex questions. It's like having small awakenings throughout the day that remind you to be present, to make conscious choices, not to live on autopilot. If you've made it this far in this reflection, it's likely that something in these words has resonated with your own experience. Maybe you want to continue exploring these ideas. Maybe you want to be part of a community of people who aren't afraid to ask difficult questions about existence. If that's the case, consider subscribing to the channel, not because you need more content to consume, but because sometimes it's comforting to know that there are other explorers navigating these same existential waters. Your journey continues to be unique and personal, but it doesn't have to be solitary. In the end, this silent anguish we all carry can be our greatest teacher. It teaches us that we don't need to have everything figured out to live fully, that we don't need absolute certainties to make courageous choices, that we don't need to wait for perfect conditions to start creating the meanings we want to see in the world. Camus reminds us that we are free precisely because there is no predetermined script for our existence. This freedom can be scary at first, but it's also profoundly liberating. You can stop trying to guess what the right path is and start creating your own path, step by step, choice by choice, day after day. The anguish that nobody confesses becomes thus not an obstacle to be overcome, but a companion that constantly reminds you of your humanity, of your consciousness, of your infinite capacity to create beauty and meaning in a universe that remains mysteriously silent about our purpose. And maybe, just maybe, this is exactly the answer you were looking for without knowing it.